So just hours from now, Dr. For Sammys, which are kind of like the Oscars for federal workers, he already received his trophy from some very special visitors. Watch this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And the Sammy goes to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who joins us now. And Dr. Fauci, for people who aren't huge baseball fans like you, those are the Nationals mascots, which hand-delivered the trophy to your house. So congratulations on that. Why do you think you won this year, finally? Why now, all of a sudden?
You know, I don't know, John. It's one of those things when you get awards, they're really, quite humbling. And you always think about the people around you that make what you do possible. So, I mean, obviously, I've been in the federal government for a long time. I hate to even say how long because people look at me and say, why is he still standing? But I've been at the NIH for like almost 50 years. And I think just the activity that's going on with COVID-19 and what I've been doing with that with my team, which is an amazing team here at NIH, I think that's probably the thing that triggered it. But, John, it feels a little bit strange to be getting a recognition when we're still in the middle of a really important historic battle. So although I'm pleased and humbled by the recognition, what I'm going to do in a couple of minutes when we're finished here is to just get right back to the compelling issues that we're dealing with COVID-19.
You have talked about what a difficult time, unprecedented time it has been to do this job. As a federal worker, as a government scientist, what pressures are you facing that you've never had to face before?
Well, I've been involved, as you probably know, John, in a number of very important outbreaks. I mean, I started off way back when I became director of the Institute in the early 1980s. Was the very beginning of the HIV AIDS pandemic. And then we had a whole bunch of things like the anthrax attacks and pandemic flu and Zika and Ebola. And now we have this unprecedented historic outbreak of COVID-19. The issue that's a bit different here now is one that I've commented on, even on your show a few times in the recent past, is that we're living in such a very divisive society right now, not only in the United States, but even globally, that's very charged politically. And you got to keep your eye on the ball of doing things that are purely on the basis of science and evidence and make sure you stay on that path, because otherwise things don't work out right. And that's one of the things that as scientists and public health officials, we've always got to rely on the science and the evidence to guide us in our decisions. That has been very intense through this outbreak. You always have a degree of that when you have outbreaks, as we've been in the past, but nothing to the intensity that we're experiencing now with COVID-19.
You talked about the fact that even after receiving this award in just minutes, you're going to go do your day job, which is to try to protect the American people from this pandemic. Let's talk about where that is right now. On the screen next to you, 209,734 Americans have now died, or more than 7.4 million cases. The daily case rate is up around 40,000. We saw 50,000 the other day.
Right.
The hospitalization rate, which had been falling, has stopped falling, and it's showing some signs maybe it's rising again. So how far away is that from where you think we should be today?
Well, John, as I've said it over and over again, particularly as we're entering into the fall season and then ultimately the winter, I am certainly not pleased, satisfied, but I'm actually disturbed and concerned about the fact that our baseline of infections is still stuck at around 40,000 per day. That's no place to be when you're trying to get your arms around an epidemic and get it to a very low baseline as you get into a situation where you're going to be indoors more than outdoors. Being outdoors is one of the things that we always talk about. Wear masks, keep your distance, avoid crowds, and try and do things outdoors more than indoors. If you look at the map, although parts of the country, John, are doing really well, I mean, have actually got the levels down. If you look at the test positivity rate in certain areas in the Midwest and Northwest, and now we're even starting to see a bit of the uptick in New York. You've got to pay attention to that, and you got to jump all over that, because if you don't do that, then what happens is you're going to see the surges that we've seen in different parts of the country, where parts come down and parts go up. We've got to stop that trend and get everything going down as a country all together, working together.
One of the new cases, obviously, is in Washington, D.C., the President of the United States. What has been your involvement in handling this case in the president's care?
Well, I think it's obvious, John, that I have not been involved. But again, I don't want to get into talking about the president's case, because that's not something that I've really been clear to talk about. But personally, I have not been involved in the direct care of the president. But I might comment that my colleagues that I know, including Sean Connolly, are very good physicians, and they're very qualified. So I am really confident that the President of the United States is getting the optimal care that you can get with the team over at Walter Reed.
You say you don't want to comment on his case specifically. Let's talk about, though, I think, some of the issues that have arisen, which is that we talked to a New York Times reporter, Michael Shear, who was at the White House event more than a week ago where Amy Coney Barrett was officially nominated for the Supreme Court. There were a lot of people there. There was an indoor portion of that. He stopped by the White House that day and then traveled with the president that night. He is now tested positive. Says he hasn't been called for contact tracing. Should he be contacted? What does that tell you about the contact tracing from that potentially dangerous event?
John, I don't know what the process of the contact tracing is that's going on at the White House. In general, the CDC is very much involved with the local authorities. So I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment about the contact tracing that's gone on around the White House, because I'm not informed on it. But the one thing we do know is that when you get cases, if you have a situation where someone comes into contact and is infected, and you know that there are people around him, that the important public health measure is to do the identification, isolation, and contact tracing, so that you can get people who have been exposed to go into the appropriate quarantine, get tested, and do the things that are very clearly delineated in the CDC guidelines.
Yeah, the only reason I brought it up is I was surprised that Michael, who in fact has tested positive and is a known figure, hasn't been contacted. And you say that's par for the course. It should be that all those people were contacted.
Yes,
Dr. Fauci,
absolutely.
From a moment when someone like Michael or someone else, from the moment when you start to show first symptoms, you display symptoms of coronavirus, how long at this point do we believe you are contagious?
John, it really varies from person to person. What usually happens is that you get exposed. After a couple of days, the virus replicates in your upper airway, and you can be infective to other people for a day or two before you actually get your symptoms. Once your symptoms come, that's a median of about 5 days is the median time from exposure to the expression of symptoms. And then after a few days, you might be sick, and yet the virus is no longer transmissible, because we've done studies when you try and isolate the virus from the nasopharynx, when people even are in the disease state or recovering, and you don't have it. So it's usually before they get symptomatic and for a few days thereafter. The general guidelines are, when is it safe for a person to go out from the time they get symptoms? It's probably around 10 days from the onset of symptoms. You usually have no virus, and in the studies that have been done, those people generally are not at all infective to other people.
Look, I know you don't want to talk about it, but you said 10 days from the moment you're showing first symptoms. The president was in an SUV last night with members of the Secret Service 4 days after he showed symptoms. So it seems to me that is short of the window where you would want to, do anything other than isolate. Am I right in reading into that? Not in this case specifically.
John, I don't want to really go there, John, and comment on that. Okay.
Broadly speaking, now that the American people have seen what can happen to anyone, what lesson should the American people take from what we've seen happening in Washington the last several days? Something that maybe will turn this pandemic in a more positive direction.
Well, John, the only thing I could do is to just refer you and others, and I'll repeat it now briefly, of things that I have been saying for months and months and months. This is a highly, highly transmissible virus. We know it goes from person to person in a very efficient way. We know it's respiratory borne. And when we say there are 4 or 5 things that we know can prevent the acquisition and transmission of infection, and that is universal wearing of masks, avoiding crowds, keep your distance, doing things outdoors more than indoors, and washing your hands regularly. Those are 5 things that I must have said on TV and radio and the print tens of thousands of times. And if we do that, we will not see the kind of outbreaks that we've just experienced.
You know what? 10,001 is a good thing. 100,001
Yep.
to say it is a good thing. So we appreciate you saying it. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Congratulations on the award, the Federal Government Worker of the Year, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you very much, John. Good to be with you. I appreciate you having me.
So we're